Welcome back to the Arc Synergy channel. Again, my name is Angeline. For those of you who are new here, I am a speech language pathologist as well as the CEO and founder of Arc Synergy. So feel free to explore the channel. I post videos usually about licensure requirements for SLPs across the US, and I also sometimes post unscripted videos like this one talking about my personal experience with travel therapy and being a speech language pathologist as well as a computer scientist as well. And today I have a treat for everyone. Today we're going to talk about my highest paying contract. So let's get into it. So I have my notes here. So if I'm looking down, that's what I'm doing. So my highest paid contract was in 2023. It was a contract in Central California, and it was in the acute care setting. So this pay, I negotiated an extension for an additional 13 weeks, followed my initial contract. And with that, I negotiated a higher paid um, salary, weekly gross salary as well. So my weekly gross after the extension was 3652 a month. We can just say 3600 just to make it a round number. So I'm going to break down how I secured that position and why it paid this much, and how the pay structured work. Um, and also stay tuned because I'll be posting later. I'll be posting a video to going over like my budget for for that specific contract and how I spent, used, saved all that money. So stay tuned for that. All right. So a little I have a video on the channel going over my journey as an SLP, how I became an SLP and when I did my CF and stuff like that. So I will put that in the link. I think it should be in the top right corner, and you can go and watch that video. But a brief overview, I completed my CF in 2021 and I started travel therapy in 2022. So this specific contract that I'm going to be talking about was either my third or fourth contract, and it was with my third travel agency. So by that time, I've already had 3 years, give or take, of acute care experiences, both during my CF with my practicum as well, and after my CF, I pretty much stayed within the acute care setting. I did dabble a little bit in post acute care for SNF and rehab, just a little bit, but my main focus was the acute care setting. And um, so I want to point that out. So that's really, really important because that will determine like how much pay you can negotiate based on how much supervision you need, how much help you need, what caseload, what diagnosis are you comfortable seeing, are you able to cover what unit you feel comfortable covering if you're comfortable doing ICU, ED, stuff like that, or neuro, stuff like that. So that's really important to keep in mind. So, like I said, it was the acute care setting in Central California. So it wasn't in a high cost of living area. So it wasn't the Bay Area because the cost of living there is ridiculous, but it was in the Central California area. So housing was much easier and much cheaper to find. The only caveat was to find a safe area since to feel safe and to live alone. But the cost of living was manageable, and So that is to say, I wanted to point that out. That is to say that you depends on where. I always recommend people to get a California license because some of the highest paying jobs are in California, and you can get really manageable cost of living if you're not in the Bay Area or in LA. So it's a really big state, so you should keep that in mind as well. So how I secure the position. So I monitor travel agencies job posts regularly. My to go is nomadic care. I always check on nomadic care first just to kind of fill out the market and to see like what setting is popping off, like what are the highest pays and stuff like that. And then over the years got really close to working with certain recruiters that I trust, and usually I just put out a filler. I just text them and like, hey, I'm potentially looking for a contract for the summer or for the fall or something like that. Like, and I'm looking. I always give them a range. And don't be shy about giving a high range. I mean, you're working with your recruiters so that they'll be able to tell you, hey, I haven't seen any around this price range. Or, yeah, like I'll keep an eye out for, and they can negotiate for you, especially if you have a history of working well with them. So I usually tell them, hey, I'm looking, I really want a high end pay, like this amount of money. Like, how close can you get me with this setting? And I always tell them what I'm willing to do, what I'm willing to negotiate on. So, for example, if location isn't really a problem, I'm like, I can be anywhere within California or in any other state that I have a license with, as long as you can get me to this pay. Or I want to be in the Bay Area, but I don't care about the setting as long as you can get me close to that pay. Like, what do you see on the market right now? So that's what I usually do. And I usually work with multiple recruiters, usually between 3 and 5, that I put out my filler first at the beginning. And then at the end, it's usually 2 to 3 recruiters that I follow. The follow depends on what they have, what settings they have, what I see, what positions that I want to secure. So then I would follow up with the other recruiters and 2 to 3 recruiters and follow up with their job post, job board, and kind of see to narrow it down and before I make a decision. So that's something that I always do, and it's so far it has served me well. And I know my worth in the acute setting as well. I usually can negotiate, depends on like what unit they want me to cover. Um, how many other SLPs are there, because I value that a lot. If there are other SLPs that especially have more experience than me, I find that as a great resource. Usually, like 9 out of 10 times, most other SLPs that I've met in the acute care setting, I'm still friends with them to this day, and they were really helpful, and they will answer questions or help me out if I need anything, or just be there as a support and help with communication and stuff like that. So that's really um, something to keep in mind. And another thing is that I apply selectively. Like, again, I if I'm looking for something specific, so that comes in. I'll talk a little bit more about when I do my budget. I keep that in mind as well, just so I am not always like needing to work ASAP, which if you do, that's fine, as long as you start looking early. Like, start looking a little bit earlier so you can just, even if you don't find something right away, you can just have things you follow up with. But I always apply selectively, and when I do the interviews, I have so many questions for them because you really have to fill them out, like the culture, um, past travel SLPs that've been there. Why do they need an SLP now? What is their hierarchy? Like, do they work closely with other team, other like PT and OT and nursing, stuff like that? Like, you to make sure that it's not a toxic work environment, which you cannot 100% avoid, but you can at least try to triage them out as much as possible. So yeah, so I look at the weekly gross pay, I look at the setting, the productivity expectation, that's a really big one, and just the contract length as well as the location and safety before I sign a contract. Even if all of those things are good, before I sign anything, I usually go and see if I can secure our housing. That is really, really important because if I cannot secure housing, then regardless of how much it pays, I'm not going, because I am not going to go and like try at the last minute trying to having nowhere to go and having to pay hotel because they're so expensive. So I always look into the area and see what housings are available before I sign anything. um, and then also you have to keep in mind the GSA rate. So those are the rate that will determine how much stipends you can get. So those are set by the federal government. There's a maximum per area. So the government can say in this area, lodging is like $60. I'm giving a random example, $60 maximum per day. So whether or not you want more or the company wants to give you more, that's what the federal GSA rate says. So they cannot go over that limit for your per diem, for your stipends. So have to keep that in mind as well, because that will affect your hourly rate and then your taxes, everything, as it's a um, domino effect. So, all right. So now, how did I get the actual offer? So the initial offer was already high. It was already in the 32, I believe, 100 a month, a week, 3200 gross a week. That was the original 13 weeks that I did at that position. And then I decided to extend because honestly, the team was the best. The location was good. um I love working with the hospital, in the hospital there. Like everything was good and I didn't have any other plans. And I've only been in the area for the first 13 weeks, so I had plenty of wiggle room to extend for tax purposes there. So I decided to extend. The discussion to extend started pretty early, I would say, by week 6, 7, at least, if not earlier. I was approached with a potential extension if I wanted to, and I was able to name like my terms, and they really, like I said, it was a nice team. It was a good team, so there wasn't any really arguments or anything, any back and forth about it. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll extend. Can as long as you increase my rate, I'm able to extend for an additional 13 weeks. And yeah, that's all it took. So sometimes, not all positions are like that. Sometimes I have to really negotiate and try to go back and forth and talk to the supervisor, to my recruiter. And usually they can increase it between 200 to 300 a month. In this one, the increase was a little more substantial. It was about 400 a week. I keep saying a month, 400 a week. So yeah, so like I said, yeah, you can negotiate anything. You can negotiate in your extension. You can add more like off days that you want, that you need. You can leverage your performance, like the caseload, your pay, everything like that. So I had to turn on the lights. All right. So where were we? Um, So, like I said, the weekly gross was 36.52, and that's basically before taxes, before insurance premium, before any investment, 401k, like pre-tax investment. So that's the money that you get paid. So that's your gross pay. So the hourly rate was around 27 an hour, around there, give or take, plus or minus $2 an hour. And the the tax that made around a taxable federal wage of like 12.95, I believe, something around there. So that's how much of the 36.52 was taxed, was around, again, 27 an hour, around 12.95, depends on how many hours I worked that week. That position paid overtime as well, so I could go over 40 hours, depends on how much need they had, and if I was on call or anything like that. So that was really nice as well. And so, again, retirement contribution, social security, disability, um, will reduce your net pay, but that is around there. So Lud, lodging. So this is the GSA that I talked about before. So lodging for that area, was the limit was 12.30 a week. So that was the limit, and meals and incidental were around $640 a week. For this position, I also have other stipends that were distributed in my paycheck. So things like relocation that I opted to distribute across my paycheck instead of taking one lump sum, and other type of reimbursements as well, like to if I had to renew licenses, going to see you for conferences and stuff like that. All of those things were given to me as well as in stipend. So that was really nice. And another thing, I think I mentioned this before, but for the GSA, that's why it's really important to think about your location and to look it up. You can look it up online pretty easily. It's a federal GSA rate. You can type that. You just have to know the zip code of where you're going. So you can see like how much of like a package, if they when they give you like a compensation package, how much of that will actually go into your pocket versus tax free, versus how much of it will have to be taxed. Because once you do the subscription of the lodging, the meals, and any other incidental stipends they can give you, the rest will have to be taxed. So that's something to keep in mind. So my net pay for usually for that time, for that contract, for the extension, was around 29.50 after taxes, 401k. I I was trying to put for money in my 401k at the time, and I also had an HSA and my of course my insurance premium. After that, per week I made around 29.51 per week. And like I said, stay tuned for a budgeting video. I'll go into that and tell you how I budgeted that money as well. And another thing, I would say that although that pay was pretty high in general for that area, but you can come close to it even if you're not quite as at 36. You can negotiate up to 3,000, 28 to 3,000 a week, usually, especially if you have to cover more than one um, hospital, or um, if they're really in need of an SLP, their SLP team shrunk for a reason or another, or if it's a rural, if it's not in a big city or a big town as well. Usually you can negotiate higher for those contracts as well. Um, I would say one thing to watch out for is the productivity. Usually in the hospital, at least the one that I've been to, it's the number of patients that you see in the number of hours that you've worked. That's usually how they do productivity. For the most standard ones have been one patient per hour is usually the minimum that I've seen. And then you have some places that also add on billing codes and stuff like that per hour that you need to meet. So usually you need to really be careful about those productivity expectations. Um, but yes, That is the story about my highest paid job as a travel therapist. Like I said, I'm going to start working on a pay breakdown and um, the name is escaping me, a budgeting video soon. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, please check out any other videos on the channel. Like I said, I'm covering all the states, and download the app, the Ox Energy app. You can look up any state information for SLPs. I'm working on adding PT and OT as well. So, yeah, thanks for watching.